the Age of Uncertainty podcast by Nigel Baker. Episode 6, Defining Done.
I've just finished mowing my lawn. It's a big old garden as well, living out here in the country. But thank goodness I am now #done. Welcome to the next video in the Age of Uncertainty podcast. This one's all about defining done. So, what is done? What is that beguiling, seductive question? What is done? Now, historically, in the olden days, done was very much based on the activity of the work you did, by the idea of division of labour. I have done the programming, I am done. Or I have done the documentation, that was my job, I am done. Or I've done the testing, that was my job, I am done. The trouble with these definitions, of course, is they are not, well, done. You know, the customer can't use the document, they can't use the code. In terms of lean, they talk about value only being added when the product's in customers' hands. So in Scrum law, we have taken a very similar approach. When it's in the customer's hands, when it's live, that is when it is done, and no other stage before that. So it has been Scrum law for a long time that we must define done. Now, for a lot of people, defining done means having a definition of done. Now, historically, definitions of done have often been things like artifacts, and these artifacts have been things like checklists, and these checklists have been information radiators stuck on the wall of the office, very visible for the entire team to see. So here's an example, a definition of done for me, for these videos themselves. So on here I've got things like the videos recorded, I put title pages on it, the music's there, sound, titles for the video, voiceovers by Catherine, transitions, edits. But you may notice here in my definition of done, there's been some changes. I've had to add things to this as I've discovered more about the work. You'll see some enhancements on here where I've learnt more doing the work, or made a few errors, and I've had to realise that some extra things needed to go in here, and over time this definition of done has been extended. So on the back here I've added social media advertising, because I realised there was no point creating these videos if no one watches them. So I added on the social media work as well. And you find this a lot in real life. People start off with a definition of done that may be perhaps lower than they would actually want in real life. Things like volume testing, they may never volume tested in their life. You know, volume testing was what they called live, basically. Oh, it works for 10,000 people. That's not good enough. But on day one, they may not have been able to volume test their sprints, let alone volume test their stories. And so they start off with a certain definition of done, and as they've got better and more mature and their technological and business capabilities have grown, their definition of done has grown to be more than development and testing and documentation, to include things like security and volume testing, design, etc, etc, etc. Generally, the more safety critical a product, the longer the definition of done. I've seen a couple out there in medical systems that have had more documentation than they've had coding on them, but that's what they needed in their space. When we talk about those things that go on a definition of done, I would try and be more specific than less specific. So the more objective we can be, the easier it is to actually make sure these things pass or fail in terms of that definition. I also would make sure humans are on that, it's just not mechanical, i.e. product owner. They should be a step on that definition of done, whether they say, I like or I dislike. Because there's a huge human element to done as well. There are some things that aren't as tangible as you would hope. So you want to have that human experience in there for someone just to go, do you know what? That's what I asked for, but now I see it, it may be not what I want. Or do you know what? That wasn't quite what I asked for, but now I've seen it, it looks good to me. That's to a certain extent acceptance criteria, but I definitely would have acceptance criteria check in or sign off by product owner as part of that definition of done. Also, you'll find as teams start working, as they start discovering more about this, as I said with my checklist, you start adding new things in. I think the joke is all process is scar tissue. It's a cover for previous pain. You will see similar things in your definition of done. Things will be added as you discover more about your product, becoming slightly more detailed. So this definition of done, this checklist publicly placed for everyone to see in the team, very powerful tool. In scaling environments, teams should share a definition of done, because there's no point one team analysing the psychometric complexity or whatever of the product and another team not even testing. They've got to agree, else one team will be bailing out the boat slower than the other team's pouring water into the boat. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about defining done, not a definition of done. You see, definition of done is just one aspect into defining done. Let's now look at those other aspects. Done. What is done? Well, we've discussed the definition of done, which is one aspect, but let's look at some others. Like for me, for instance, I always like to talk about what level of quality is expected at the start of a product experience. I sometimes call it like a vision on done. Having some idea in business language from business people what their expectation is on this work. Are we expecting to launch a rocket to the moon, or are we doing some quick, dirty experiment with a new idea? The difference between quality between a little startup where people are trying new ideas, moving fast and breaking things, is very different to something large-scale enterprise where failure is not an option. So we need to understand that at the start, and that needs to be communicated. I think, frankly, in the software industry, that's been a common anti-pattern. People have hacked out high quality products and put far too much effort into some low fidelity stuff. If you look at sort of lean Muda, they talk about over processing and overproduction. Okay, in terms of over engineering, we make too much of something or we gold plate something. I do see that occasionally in our space, but more often I see under engineered products. Defects, 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 defects. I once had a guy in a workshop who said, look, Nige, I'm a software developer. My job is to turn Jira tickets into defects. And we all laughed, but I'm afraid the laugh was a bit more knowing than hilarious. All those defects. And so we've got to make sure we have a broad understanding in human about what the expectations are on this thing. So that effectively is the why of done. Not what is done, why is done. Why do we need that level of quality? Then we need to look at the what. And by what, in the agile space, that is often things such as acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria is a great way of defining out some of the work we're trying to achieve. It's not the exact details, we're not solutionizing, but the idea of acceptance criteria is to create a bit of a sandbox around the problem space to give us some idea if it hits this, this, this and this, the work is done. What are we hoping to achieve here? What are we looking to see? What will be different in the end? Even things like scalability, usability, they can all fall under acceptance criteria or some technique like that. But putting a bit of boxing around the idea so our requirements are all loose and ill-defined. And I don't mean ill-defined in a good way. I mean ill-defined in a we have no idea what we're doing, so we're going to build the wrong thing way. You want to have that. You don't want your requirements too nitty gritty. I feel I like to have a bit of space in my stories to discover new things and new ways of doing stuff. But we do need to get some idea of what it is we're trying to achieve. And then sort of underneath that, I often call it below the waterline, we have the definition of done. But definition of done is not the only way of helping us understand how we're going to achieve success. Engineering tasks has been the other major way, breaking the work down, unpacking the work into smaller technical lumps to get a better appreciation of how we're going to do it, to make sure we don't miss anything. I know the movement in Agile is generally away from engineering tasks as teams become more successful and have better understanding. But I saw at a conference feels like a lifetime ago now, talking about estimation quality and saying actually unpacking work down into smaller bits does help people have a better appreciation of the work. So we shouldn't dismiss that unpacking. That can be very helpful to help us better understand what is done. The final thing I want to look at is actually a little bit Marmite. Now, for those of you in different countries, you may not have had the wonderful experience of Marmite. It is a yeast extract that in the UK we spread on our toast. Yum! Now, some people, it has to be said, really dislike Marmite, and some people love it. So in the UK, when things have a very contrasting opinion in industry, where some people love it and some people hate it, they often call that their very Marmite, or the Marmite effect. Definition of ready is something that has a huge Marmite effect. Some people find it incredibly powerful. You know, as a definition of done is like a post-flight checklist of all the details the crew have to go through when they've landed their plane. Well, the definition of ready is a pre-flight checklist of something similar. A checklist to go through to make sure the story's got this, it's got that, it's got an actor, it's got acceptance criteria, it's got a business reason or a business objective. If it's got all these things in place, then it's allowed in the sprint. There is an airline in Europe called Ryanair that famously have a bag checking device. I'll try and put a picture up here somewhere. Oh, there. A bag checking device that if your bag is above a certain size, it's not even allowed in the plane. It's got to go into the cargo hold instead. And that is for a lot of people a definition of ready. The story has to be below a certain size. The story has to have certain details on it to allow it to move forward. I actually find that really useful, but it depends on the context. If you're in a big enterprise product that's been around, it may feel a bit more like a sausage machine when you're doing these features. Another feature added to the big machine. Something like a definition of ready there could be really powerful actually to help sort of filter and get your work down into nice little slices. However, if you're doing explorative work, discovery work, new ideas, experimentation, and when I say experimentation, I don't mean experiments like a scientist, I mean experimenting like a teenager, glug, 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 up the park with the proverbial, well in the UK at least, big bottle of cider, drinking it and finding out an awful experience of life. But that's what you have to do when you're a teenager here. You have to experiment. If you want to experiment like that in your sprints, probably a definition of ready is a bad idea. It's actually an anti-pattern. It's a negative behaviour. You probably want in that situation your stories quite loose to allow you to explore during the sprints. So you can see a definition of ready for some teams could be really powerful, yet for others could be a huge, huge anti-pattern. We've got to be careful with this, but it's all helping us ask that question, what is done? So of course, classically, if your definition of done is not good enough, you are building undone, incomplete work up at the end of every sprint. And that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you get into more and more and more and more trouble. As you're going to have to do this work at some point, and at the end is possibly the worst time to be doing that testing, that documentation, that making sure this thing really does what you wanted it to do. But it's the same thing with the other ones. If you don't have a vision on this, everyone could have a misunderstanding. If you don't have acceptance criteria in place, you could end up building the right level of quality, the wrong blooming thing. Is that then done? If you don't fully understand what complete looks like, we are into a whole heap of trouble. If we don't even know how to do this, we could build defects into this thing. So all these aspects, tasks, definition of done, acceptance criteria, some sort of vision on quality, some sort of definition of ready maybe, but all these things contribute to help us define done better. It's product to product. It's definitely not a company-wide thing, but for me, I personally always have my definition of done on a feature by feature basis. For me, a story or a feature, and I use the two terms interchangeably, by the way, but a story is the smallest unit of value we deliver, and so that's why I have a definition of done. I don't necessarily want to care about the sprint or the release. We should be doing it the right way every single sashimi slice we're delivering to build a better product. That's what I do anyway. Okay, so I've done something a little bit different this time. I've actually gone on Twitter and just asked anyone if they would like to know anything particular about defining done and the definition of done. And I had some interesting questions come up. Now I think I may have covered these mostly in the video, but I thought I'd just use them to explore a little bit deeper if I feel I haven't before. So let me read them off the screen. Okay, the first one here is about the differences between done from a story, a release and a feature, and how to avoid making it a gating exercise. That's Erica from America. Well, thank you, Erica. Now, for me, as I said a moment ago, I actually try not to do that. I try and have complete work on every single story. Now, I know that's an aspiration, and I do know that is difficult, but that is my aim in the long term. That is my strategy. However, tactically, varying the difference between done on a story, done on a sprint, done on a release could be a tactic, as I said, to help us get there, but I need to make sure it's a tactic. If I am going to do that, I would try and visualize them all and visualize the gap between them and probably try and expose that risk of that gap. I.e., let's use scalability volume testing. If I'm only volume testing every 2 or 3 sprints, that has a huge potential risk and it delays release until the end of that, frankly, that release. And so visualizing it first is a great trick to allow us then to work on it. What I would try and do is minimize it and work on building, as I said earlier on, building up that definition of done as much as I can, as soon as I can. This is more difficult when the products aren't soft. I don't just mean software, I mean like media, marketing, to process. These are all very soft areas which gives you a lot of malleability. You can really do that proper sashimi slicing in your sprints and have done on every single slice. I've been doing some work recently in more hardware and some really weird hardware focused areas, and for them actually getting story slices done is quite difficult. They have to really think of it from a whole sprint point of view. The rules of Scrum, if they mean anything, say it has to be a minimum on the sprint, on the total increment, so that's what they're doing, but the more we can do in the soft space in those small slices, I think the better. The next one's from Jim Buckley Barrett. He asked about the difference between DoD and acceptance, DoD across a company, and the definition of done across teams with different maturity levels. Now I think that one there is quite interesting. Different maturity levels on the same product. So I think we've done DoD and acceptance. Acceptance criteria is effectively the what. Definition of done is connected with tasks in being about the how. DoD across company, we spoke about that earlier on. We agreed there should not be one definition of done across the company. It will be different product to product. Though I could see an argument for there being like a minimum acceptable definition of done on our products that we release. I don't know, imagine if we're some large famous brand, we may never want to put something out below a certain minimum level of tolerance, but that's a conversation, not a rule. But that final one, DoD across teams, we said they've got to be agreed. But what happens if one team is far more experienced than another? Oh, that's my children. So let me jump in there. But this final one, DoD across teams with different maturity levels on the same product, that is fascinating. Because we said before in the video, you really want to have an agreed definition of done across all teams, else one will bodge when one is building great quality. However, I could see an argument for there being some teams not needing certain things that other teams need. I'll give an example. Let's say we've got Bob the architect, okay? So Bob's like an architectural coach. He's helping everyone understand some of the big choices we're making in this system. Some teams that may be newer and more naive, they may need more Bob's advice. They may have to literally clear everything past Bob. Now, I'm not saying that's a good practice, but I'm saying it may be something they feel they have to do to make sure they're happy actually launching this thing. Yet a more mature team, which Bob has got high confidence in, and more importantly, the team's got high confidence in some of Bob's architectural coaching, they may not need such heavy-handedness in terms of the definition of done. I could imagine a definition of done almost with logic gates within it, but I think that could be getting a little bit complex. I have done a little of that myself, but that would be something I would explore with those other teams. But I could definitely see there being extra areas of coverage for certain teams with some sort of minimum level for all of us. But generally, if you've got that problem, that means your teams are a bit different in terms of skill set, and that's a big risk. I'll probably try and equalize those teams in terms of ability as well. My old good friend Andreas has brought one up. The relationship between done and increment. Well, I would just say that's a huge topic. It could be the entire video. For me, if it isn't done, it's not an increment. It's nothing that's been made. It's just pure moodle, pure waste if it isn't actually achieved the right level of quality. Now, as I said a moment ago, I like to do that sashimi slicing thing, building up thin slices, feature, all done into a lovely whole increment. I understand that's not always possible outside the software context, though in my experience, a lot of people inside software don't think it's possible either, just because they haven't done it. Never confuse can't with haven't, and never confuse can't with won't. These are three different conversations. Some people say they can't when they haven't, they don't know how. Some people say can't when they won't try. Okay, these are different things. So for me, that done approach helps give an actual real valuable increment. Though in the end, the increment is just output. And what interests me more is outcome. So what do I mean by that? Well, the increment itself just is a thing of functionality that does stuff. It's output, story points, whatever, output, the features. Who cares? What's the value behind that? I think is what's interesting to me. What is the actual value to the customer? We spoke about having lumps of work that deliver value. Well, look at it from this point of view. If value is money, then this is going to have to make us make money. If value is customer satisfaction, this product's going to make us happier. If the value is learning, like in many startups or in the lean startup mentality of learning, well then the product needs to enable us to learn. Looking back at done from that point of view, well, learning could be done from something as dodgy as vaporware, clicking a button on a website and discovering there's nothing beneath it beyond an order page. That, I guess, could be an argument for very thin slices of work that aren't actually software at all. They're just theories and process and mock-ups to help us learn more from them. So I could see an argument there in terms of quality. You don't have to build enterprise level software to achieve that learning. So the idea of what done looks like is inexorably linked to the increment, but what the increment is inexorably linked to value. Anyway, I hope those points helped us expand a little bit on what I'm trying to talk about in terms of done. If you've got any more points like that, please put them in the comments on this video, and we can maybe revisit this video later at another point, picking those up, or just have a chat about them in the comments. I really want these videos, these podcasts, to be iterative, to be incremental, and to be collaborative, and not just me monologuing at you. Oh God, that was quite a long monologue. I think we should stop there and let's move on. Okay, talking about done. Is there anything else I want to say? Well, one last thing. I've mowed my lawn. Okay, the lawn is mown. But it doesn't stay mown. That grass keeps growing. It's a bit like done. It never seems to be a stable target. There's always something you have to do. So I better get my cap back on and get out and do some more mowing. So this video, I think we can now say, is done. It's been lovely to see you. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see you again soon. Take care. Oh, God. It's never done, is it? Could you please share this video for me on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, anywhere where you've got some social media? Let's share and talk about these videos. God, I told you, it's never really done, is it? Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Next episode, a history of prediction in 10 objects.